I was at Archie's. I had to talk to someone. Well, that's what's happening. The Shun-E, so to speak, has gotten himself in Dutch with the church, so he's excommunicated. The whole community is in on it. Unless he repents, nobody speaks to him for the rest of his life. Not even his family. What? That's right. Not even his family. What about his wife? Wife, kids, everybody. His pipe had gone out. He relit it with a stick match. I believe the idea is to drive him away. But some stay, continue working the farm, having dinner. If he passes salt to his wife, she ignores it. If the bishop had his way, the pigs and the chickens would ignore him. It's as if he doesn't exist. I nodded. I know the feeling. We were on the back porch. I stared out at Senor Saguaro. He said, "Does it happen to you when you're not with her?" "No," I said. "At least, I don't think so. But when I'm with her, I feel like it's aimed at me, too." A small pipe cloud left the corner of his mouth. He smiled sadly. Poor dolphin, caught in a tuna net. I picked up Barney, the Paleocene rodent, skull. I wondered if someone would be holding Cinnamon's head 60 million years from now. So what should I do? Archie waved his hand. "Oh, well, that's the easy part. Stay away from her. Your problem? Kaput." I sneered. Great advice. You know it's not that easy. He did know, of course. But he wanted me to say it. I told him about the Valentine, the night in her driveway, the walk in the desert. The question that came to mind then sounded silly, but it persisted. "Do you believe in enchanted places?" He took the pipe from his mouth and looked straight at me. "Absolutely." I was confused. "But you're a scientist, a man of science, a man of bones. You can't be up to your eyeballs in bones and not believe in enchanted places." I looked at Barney. I ran my fingertip along the hard line of his 2-inch jaw, rough like a cat's tongue. 60 million years in my hands. I looked at Archie. "Why can't she be," he finished for me, "like everybody else?" He stood up and stepped down from the porch onto the desert for his backyard. Except for the shed where he kept his digging tools, was the desert. Nature did the landscaping. I put down Barney and joined him. We ambled towards Senor Saguaro. "Not like everyone else," I said. "Not exactly. Not totally. But Archie..." I stopped. He stopped. I turned full face to him. My thoughts and feelings were a wild, conflicting jumble. After staring stupidly at him for a long time, I blurted out, "She cheers for the other team!" Archie pulled the pipe from his mouth, as if to better digest my words. He raised one finger in the air. He nodded solemnly. "Ah, yes." We resumed walking. We walked on past the tool shed, past Senor Saguaro. Occasionally, I picked up a stone and flung it towards the purple maricopas. Archie said, almost in a whisper, "She's not easy to put into words, is she?" I shook my head. "An unusual girl," he said. "Could see that from the first. And her parents? As ordinary, in a nice way, as could be. How did this girl come to be? I used to ask myself. Sometimes I thought she would be teaching me. She seems to be in touch with something that the rest of us are missing." He looked at me. I nodded. He turned the mahogany bowl of his pipe upside down and rapped it with his knuckle. A small stream of ash spilled into a thicket of dead mesquite. He pointed the pipe stem at me. "You know, there's a place we all inhabit, but we don't much think about it. We're scarcely conscious of it, and it lasts for less than a minute a day. What's that? I said. It's in the morning for most of us. It's that time? A few seconds when we're coming out of sleep but we're not really awake yet. For those few seconds, we're something more primitive than what we are about to become. We have just slept the sleep of our most distant ancestors, and something of them and their world still clings to us. For those few moments, we are uninformed, uncivilized. We are not the people we know as ourselves, but creatures more in tune with a tree than a keyboard. We are untitled, unnamed, natural, suspended between what was and what will be, the tadpole before the frog, the worm before the butterfly. We are, for a few brief moments, anything and everything we could be. And then? He pulled out his pouch and repacked his pipe. Cherry scent flew. He struck a match. The pipe bowl, like some predator or seducer, drew down the flame. And then, we open our eyes, and the day is before us. And, he snapped his fingers, we become ourselves. Like so many of Archie's words, they seemed not to enter through my ears, but to settle on my skin, there to burrow like tiny eggs awaiting the reign of my maturity. When they would hatch, and at last I would understand. We walked in silence. Yellow blooms had appeared on a cactus, and for some reason that made me incredibly sad. The purple of the mountains flowed like watercolor. They hate her, I said. He stopped. He looked intently at me. He turned me around, and we headed back. He put his arm around my shoulder. Let's consult Senor Saguaro. Shortly we were standing before the derelict giant. I never understood how the Senor managed to convey a sense of dignity, majesty even, considering his stick-rickety, see-through skeleton and the ridiculous, leathery crumple of hide about his foot, his fallen breeches. Archie always spoke to him with respectful formality, as to a judge or a visiting dignitary. Good day, Senor Saguaro, he began. I believe you know my friend and charter member of the Loyal Order of the Stone Bone, Mr. Borlock. He whispered an aside to me. I'm a little rusty, but I think I'll use Spanish now. He prefers that on delicate matters. He turned back to the cactus. Okay. Parce, Senor Borlock, aquí es la víctima de un shunning de sus compañeros estudiantes en el liceo. El objeto principal del shunning es la enamorada del señor Borlock, nuestra propia señorita niña estrella. Él está en búsqueda de preguntas. As Archie spoke, he looked up towards the elf owl hole. Now he turned back to me and whispered. I asked for questions. Questions? I whispered. What about answers? But he was turning from me, tilting his head towards the great cactus, his finger on his lips. Shh. His eyes closed. I waited. At last he nodded and turned to me. The esteemed senor says there is only one question. What's that? I said. He says it all boils down to this, if I'm translating correctly. Whose affection do you value more? Hers or the others? The senor says everything will follow from that. I wasn't sure I understood the senor any more than I understood Archie half the time, but I said nothing, and I went home. In bed that night, as the moonlight reached the tide under my chin, I realized that, in fact, I understood the question perfectly. I just didn't want to answer it. That was chapter 19. I'm sorry, I have butchered the Spanish completely. Oh my goodness, that was so bad.